Hi, everybody. Michael Barris here. Welcome to part 3 of our look at speaking for career growth. Today's installment is titled The Power of Personality. And that's based on the third principle in my book, uh, How to Become a Super Speaker, the 7 Principles for Speaking with Confidence and Connecting with Audiences. But to jazz up today's proceedings a bit, instead of just going by the literal name of the third principle, which was display personality, I decided to make it the power of personality, because when you can connect with everything that defines what you are, and yet filter it through a kind of performance attitude so that you connect with the audience, it's very, very powerful. You may have even found how you've been at a conference and there's been an unending parade of speakers all day, and polished speakers dispensing very useful knowledge. And then you find that around 3 o'clock, people are starting to get a little weary. Speech fatigue is starting to settle in. And somebody comes along who's a little different than the others. Somebody who got a quirkier way about him. He calls out to people he knows in the audience or backstage. Hey, John, how are you? Hi, Sam, how are you doing? He has a kind of animated way of moving around the stage. He's got a smile on his face perpetually, as if he's got some joke he's laughing at. And he may even stumble over his words or over his feet, but he does it all so smoothly that it almost seems as if it's just part of his style. Well, in the end, when all is said and done, at the end of the day, the one you might actually remember out of all those speakers is that one who seemed more human than the others, because he wasn't afraid to show generously his human fallibility, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessary to be a sloppy speaker or a careless speaker or somebody who doesn't have their ideas well organized. That's not going to cut it. We are here still speaking in a business environment, and people, their time is valuable. You only have a few seconds, it's said, to get attention. You have to be on point. You don't want to waste time. But you have to learn how to get it so that elements of your personality come out that separate you from everybody else, because you're showing you're really more of a human being than anybody else. So let's look right now. And if you have any comments, please feel free to share them with us here and let us know where you're from as you're watching this presentation today. When you think about leaders you remember, what were the distinguishing traits? Was it the way they spoke? Was it the way they listened to you? Was it always just their actions? I'm guessing it could not have just been their actions, because, as you know, if you're in a work environment for a while, you kind of forget about the work aspect. It almost becomes like being home in a way, and it becomes more emotional. So the leaders you remember likely found a way to leverage those more human traits so that they created a more human environment for you. At least that's how it might have felt. The chances are they displayed a gloriously human personality, or as close to glorious as you could have. The bottom line is, the legacy of the social media age is that, warts and all, does resonate strongly with that audience. Authenticity rules. We hear this over and over again. And when you can apply this idea that it's okay to show your fallibility to your work role and the way you speak about your work role, the way you speak at work, it can have a powerful resonance. So what we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes is about how harnessing the power of personality. I want you to understand that there is a way to turn those accidental stumbles that may cause panic or may cause you to think, oh my God, what am I doing up here? I'm such a fraud, into a stylistic trait. It could actually help you to stick in the minds of your audience. Ultimately, I want you to understand that if you show that infallibility in a relaxed way, if you trip, if you stumble over a word like I just did, but just carry on without apologizing, as if it was just all part of your being up here in front of the crowd. You're telling the audience this is your onstage persona, and they'll be okay with it. Because one important thing to remember is that the ear is much more forgiving of the spoken word than the I is of the written word. So you can play with quite a bit here. You don't have to be a perfect grammarian. You don't have to have perfect pronunciation of every word. You can be a little human. I see Bree Williams is with us. Hi, Bree. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us today. And before I go any farther, I want to share with you right now a tool that will make your rise through the corporate ranks, or even as an independent entrepreneur, faster. It's because this is a tool that will help you understand how to make audiences take action. There's just 4 simple steps. And you can avail yourself of this tool right now. If you go on LinkedIn, near the bottom, I guess, of the comments section, you'll see a link I shared with there, and it will say something like, click on this link to learn how to make audiences take action. And that's yours. It's a little bit of a thank you for me for your attention today and showing my gratitude that you're tuning in with us today. All right, now let's get down to some things here. How did quirkiness ever become a desired trait in a speaker? Now, again, the study of personality is nothing new, at least certainly in speaking. As I've been, I work with Bree here who's on our comments with us, and we talked about how a speaker could be a sage, a person who dispenses wise advice, a jester who's somewhat of a comic. You could be a teacher who's dedicated to the idea of helping people to improve and to grow. And there are many other categories like that. That is not a new study. But the difference is, my view of speaking, as you've heard me talk about before, is that the audience is everything. If you ignore the audience's behavior and their reactions to what you're putting out, you're doing it at your own peril. You've got to tailor everything you're doing to connecting with the audience. It's like I'm saying, start with the end result, how the audience is going to perceive you, how they are going to react to what you're talking about, and then work backwards till you get essentially a plan for how to speak. So today, it's been documented that, say, the largest audiences on social media, the millennials, 90% of them say that authenticity matters. Now, granted, this is a stat that comes from I think a 2017 survey that is 5 years old, but I'm willing to bet that has not changed. In fact, it may even become more. And you know how you know that? Just look at all the reels on things like Facebook or TikTok. This is capturing life in the moment. There's an expression that when mobile technology caught on, we talked about serving people in the mobile moments that matter. And that's essentially what we're saying here. People have gotten so used to getting what they want now, to getting everything they want without having to wait, that it's become more intense and more relevant to show people life now. So that's one reason why I think quirkiness, which seems to really be the fullest expression of a person just being in the present, how that's become more acceptable. You can go on LinkedIn. You'll see many, many videos where people will come up rather shyly and they'll say, this is my first video. I've never done this before. I'm really scared. And it gets great response. Now, that's not what I'm about here. I'm about helping you to speak in a way that's professional, that's poised, that helps you arouse people to follow calls to action. But the point here is that there is great acceptance now, huge acceptance now for people who are willing to show those human traits. And as I pointed out in the bottom of that slide, modern audiences have just become hypersensitive to the display of any kind of artificial stage presentation. What do I mean by artificial? Well, it could be something as just being a little too formal, wearing a jacket and tie when you know very well that I'm in my office, which is a space which does not seem to demand a jacket and tie, that kind of thing. They're more sensitive to anything that doesn't seem, if you will, organic and natural. The thing is that, look, there's a price, there is a dynamic here. Not everybody's going to like everybody else. And that's okay. So what this means is that if you're busy showing all your human fallibility or all the things that make you you. And there are people out there who don't like it. Well, that's the way it goes. That's life. We can't please everybody. However, while they may not always agree with you or with what they see and hear, the fact is they're going to remember you, because they're going to remember, gee, that guy, he went on and on. He had weird points. He had this funny angle. He had a mustache. What's with that? But you remember him. Oh, yeah, I remember that guy. And that is currency. If you want to get ahead in business, if you want to make a sale, you want to impress anybody, but your product or your service or whatever it is that you're trying to motivate them to take an interest in, you want them to remember you. And by the way, you've probably heard it said that the average business speech, 10 minutes after you give it, just 10 minutes, half of it is forgotten right after you step off the stage. That is, if they took it in all in the first place. Of course, a day later, you're lucky if they're remembering 75% of it. I'm sorry, a day later, you're lucky if they're remembering 25% of it. And a week later, you're lucky if they're remembering 5% of it. So now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How do you actually release your personality? Well, in a way, these are very basic ideas that are not new to public speaking. But the thing is, they're just not carried out as much as they should be. So it's incumbent on me to point them out here. Number one is stop relying on a script where you've got things written out, a script, your narrative written out in full sentences, and you're essentially reciting this memorized narrative. First of all, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. I'll continue that sentence right after I have a sip of water. You are basically enslaving yourself to this text. And you can almost see the eye contact going as the person's trying to remember it. We had a very productive third quarter. Our Bermuda operations were increased 35%. See what I mean? It's like you're trying to recall every little bit of the sentence. And you just get yourself into trouble, because what happens if you can't remember it? Then you're on stage, you don't remember where you are, and you're fumbling around trying to remember where you are. It does not help the presentation. Yeah, I know that's authentic, but that's not good authentic. That's not the authentic that's going to make the business people in the audience say, that's a salient point. So the other thing is that if you're busy trying to remember the words, your eye contact gets all shut. You want me to be looking you right in the camera as I'm doing right now. However, if I'm trying to remember the script, I could be looking up here or looking over here. You've probably seen people doing it all the time. And this only gets in the way of your engagement. And it doesn't help you remember things any better. So what's the best way to deal with this? You've got to create keywords. You can use that script you've written. It does have a purpose, but only this time and only this time, just once. Go through it, pick 2 or 3 words per sentence that resonate with you. And it's your particular resonance. There's no right or wrong answer to this. You've got to just pick a couple of words that arouse you emotionally in some way, and then you want to speak to those keywords. So basically, when you're crafting your speech, and it could even just be a comment in a meeting, by the way, I'm not talking about a 20-minute speech at a conference. I'm just talking about making any kind of a comment in a public meeting place or a forum, whatever, that you would want to just jot down those points and then speak to them, so that you're essentially bringing fresh language and ideas to the speaking proposition. Now, after a while, if you have time to rehearse, try to get in the habit of doing this without keeping the sheet of keywords in front of you. And I will say one thing, that, we say, try not to use memorized text. I do admit that after you go through this process a couple of times, it is possible that you find yourself starting to use some of the same phrases over and over. That's okay, as long as there's a flow of reality to it. In some ways, if you become a little more like an actor, that's okay. But for the most part, I want your presence to be real and genuine and alive. And you can get that when you are speaking to keywords rather than relying on a memorized script. The third thing to do then is practice. Now, again, if you're asked to speak in a meeting and you only have like 5 minutes to think of what you're going to say or no time, it's a lot harder to practice. But what you can aim to do is to use questions, create interactivity, whatever you need to foster the feeling of a two-way conversation. Because great speaking is essentially a dialogue, or it has the feeling of a dialogue. You may not want the audience to actually be talking to you when you're speaking, but you want them to feel as if they were in the midst of a conversation with somebody else. I'm on the stage, but I'm really with them in their lives in the moment. And it gets easier to do this when you practice, work up different kinds of questions. It's worth the investment of your time to learn how to become a better question asker, because that's how you get engagement. That's how you get people to keep listening. That's how you sustain curiosity throughout the narrative. And essentially, it's how you drive them to follow the call to action, whatever that may be, whether it's clicking on a link, donating money to a cause, agreeing to vote for you for senator, whatever. Questions, interactivity, dialogue. That's the way you get that personality to come out, and that's the way you get the audience with you. Now, let me tell you about how I applied this process to help a fellow I worked with. His name is Avi. And he was a new leader. It was important to him that he become a leader, but he discovered not long after getting his leadership gig that he felt underprepared to take on the speaking tasks that he was expected to do that went with his greater responsibilities as a leader. And this was a serious issue because if he wasn't confident in his ability to speak, he would hold back from making decisions, which really wasn't his job. His job was to make decisions. He'd hold back on advising workers on actions. And there was a danger he'd even become a bottleneck. He could even potentially block someone who wanted to leave the department and move on somewhere because they were talented, but be so afraid, oh gosh, if they leave, how am I going to carry on without them? So all this came from his feeling of being underprepared to speak. This is how important it is to be a competent speaker if you want to become a leader. So first we got him to get in the habit of using emotional keywords to control those memory jitters, like I was just explaining to you about. It wasn't hard for him, really. He found he wasn't used to the process of thinking that way. But first I had him write out something in long form. I said, Avi, write me 150 words about why you want to become a good speaker and what you hope to accomplish in business. So he did that. So then I said, okay, now I want you to look at me and I want you to read this thing with emphasis as if you were delivering a speech, but reading it from that piece of paper. So he read it. And then afterwards I said, how did that feel? He said, it was okay. I guess it was sort of average. And then we looked at the video. I should mention I'd recorded him doing this. And then we looked at the video of how he looked. And he could see right away, he thought, oh, my eyes are really going into the piece of paper. I said, yes, aren't they? He said, that's not good. I said, no, you've got to get that piece of paper out of your way so you can make eye contact with the audience straight on, because that's the window into your heart, your ideas, your mind, and your personality. And if you do this, you're denying them access to that window on your personality. Then we did a lot of impromptu speaking. I said to him, look, I'm going to spring an impromptu speaking topic on it. You're never going to know when. I'll give you a couple of minutes to prepare. Do the best you can. Just try to say it with impact. Be direct. Try to be open. Try to be giving in your ideas. And try to make it seem as natural as you possibly can. I know that sounds like quite a list, doesn't it? But that's how close coaching works. There's a little bit of pain in the beginning. It's not easy, but you stick with it. And the more they do it, the more they see it's possible to do. It can be done. So that's how doing impromptu speaking exercises with him increased his comfort. And it was very good, for example, when he had to handle a Q&A. I've worked with other people who had the same sort of issues, that they were afraid in a Q&A that a question would come up that they couldn't handle. And we had to just practice it. We did a lot of role playing. where I pretended to be the audience, they pretended to be the speaker. Sometimes we switched the roles so they could see what it was like when the Q&A was being handled by somebody who was confident, by somebody who wasn't confident. And gradually they saw that they didn't have as much to fear as they thought they did. In fact, that's really the source of a lot of obstacles to confidence, isn't it? That you imagine that what you stand to lose by taking bold action is going to far exceed the reality. But when you get used to seeing that, well, gee, it's not really as bad as I thought it would be, the confidence grows and you get a little more comfortable with taking your idea of what risk is. And then the threshold of risk expands and it grows and grows. And gradually you feel more confident just letting things fly more in an impromptu situation, including in a Q&A. We also helped him to become more confident in doing media interviews. I played the journalist. It's a role I know quite well since I've been one for a long time. And we also got him, I said, let's go now through a setting where you have to make a decision. Let's pretend that I'm some higher up and I'm asking you to let me know what you want to do with something. So he worked through these things. And gradually he said he came to see that he was much stronger than he thought he was. He had more power than he thought he did. And he was perhaps even a lot smarter than he thought he was. He really didn't give himself much of a break. And from that point on, his career as a leader progressed. That's why I also did a lot of mindset training with him too, as well. This way, if he was speaking and he stumbled or got tongue-tied, he realized this is not a time to panic. You can actually just pause. The audience doesn't really mind pauses. In fact, they may lend a certain dramatic element to your presentation. And just let yourself go with it. Do not apologize. Never say, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Or, hey, I don't really know what I'm saying here. Never, never, never do that. Because then you damage your role as the leader when you're giving a talk. But doing all these things I've talked about will give your presentation greater authenticity, and it will add impact. It'll make it memorable, and it'll make your point stronger. The takeaway here is that if you know how to leverage your personality to get stakeholders to follow calls to action, you're well positioned to move up in your career. Because the thing about dealing with stakeholders is that there can be diverse groups within an organization. You know, if there's a project, a common project that is being created, you need the approval of the stakeholders from all different factions, because everybody has different needs, different priorities. And this is a time when you want to show you're a human being and you can relate to other groups as human beings. Granted, it helps to know exactly how to speak to them about their issues, but it's very important here just to come across as somebody who is accessible, who you can talk to, who listens, who gives back feedback, who even shows humor, who just shows they're a human being. And that's what showing your personality will do for you. The thing is, again, I want to emphasize that you can really only benefit from using personality to enhance your career growth if you're doing one thing. As I've been repeating here, you've got to meet the needs of the audience. So it's important to understand, again, what that end result is, what they want from you, how you can help them improve their situation, how you can deliver a certain benefit, a certain experience, whatever it is. That's what you have to aim for. And then you can think backwards, backtrack to get a speaking plan for yourself. Because when you meet the needs of your audience, that's how you're going to make your personality working for you have the greatest impact. So once again, I want to encourage you, if you haven't done it already, to take advantage of using that tool I talked about at the beginning of this presentation about getting audiences to take action. That's an important part if you're dealing with different stakeholder groups, if you want to impress higher ups, if you just want to be a more effective worker in your department. The more you know how to get people to follow calls to action, to execute on plans, the more powerful a leader or potential leader you'll be. So I urge you, again, go to that link that's in the comments section on LinkedIn in the post on which this broadcast sits, and you can watch a video that breaks the process down into just 4 simple phases. I urge you to do that. All right, folks. If we don't have any questions, then I'm going to go into wrap-up mode here. My next broadcast will be part 4, based on the principle of my book, which says, feel the fear, but keep practicing. And that will take place next Tuesday, November 22nd at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And this is the time I intend to keep these presentations at. That was my original plan when I launched this series. But as John Lennon used to say, life got in the way while I was making other plans. So at any rate, I see no further questions. So we're going to wrap up. I want to thank you very much for following us. Feel free to stay in touch with me on LinkedIn if you have any more questions. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.